American comic. I have all the skills from Warcraft 3. Chapter 41. Night fell, accompanied by towering flames. Another luxurious villa was completely engulfed. Around the villa, some dark figures could vaguely be seen dancing wildly in the firelight. It was like a carnival of death. Facing this hellish scene, Rosen, standing outside the villa, merely waved his hand indifferently. Those dark figures then vanished into thin air. A month, that's about enough. Rosen muttered, then a white light enveloped him. When Rosen reappeared, he was already on a sunny, isolated hill. At his feet was an inconspicuous sand lizard. Not far away was a bustling valley. Numerous armed militants were making noise in the camp, discussing their great achievements after just plundering a village. Soon, a lookout militant spotted the suddenly appearing Rosen. Just as he was about to give the alarm, a cloud of black mist enveloped him, and he instantly turned into a shriveled corpse. But this was just the beginning. The next second, a gigantic black shadow appeared behind Rosen. With a wave of the shadow's hand, a human-sized dark shadow emerged from the shriveled corpse, roaring and rushing towards the militants below with inhuman speed. Before the militants in the valley could react, one of them was tackled by the dark shadow and torn to pieces. And as this person was torn to pieces, a dark shadow also emerged from his remaining body. Facing such a terrifying situation, the militants in the valley who had come to their senses shot at the two dark shadows like madmen. Some even picked up rocket launchers and manned portable missiles. But whether it was bullets or rockets, they passed directly through these dark shadows, unable to cause them any harm. On the contrary, the more people killed by the dark shadows, the more dark shadows appeared. In less than 3 minutes, the entire valley, except for Rosen, had no living person left, only dark shadows searching everywhere. These dark shadows were naturally the spirit of vengeance summoned by the ultimate skill of the Watcher's ultimate move, the vengeful god, behind him. Seeing this, Rosen didn't waste any time. Under his continuous casting, body after body shattered again, and out crawled giant beetles the size of washbasins. These beetles didn't stay after appearing but silently burrowed into the desert and dispersed. Seeing this scene, Rosen nodded with great satisfaction. The spirit of vengeance is still so useful. It's a great weapon in team fights, and it only needs the souls of the dead. The corpses of the dead can also be reused to summon beetles or other dark creatures. Unfortunately, however, this valley was not the one where Tony Stark was imprisoned. So Rosen didn't hesitate. The next second, white light enveloped him again. This skill was precisely the ultimate skill of the human hero Archmage, mass teleportation. As long as there was a presence marked by Rosen's magic beacon as a friendly unit, mechanical critters and the protagonist's other summoned creatures are system defaults and do not require marking, Rosen could teleport to their side from anywhere on Earth. In a month in Mexico, Rosen himself had lost count of how many drug lords, dens he had cleaned out. The total accumulated wealth had reached an astonishing $4.8 billion, and gold and other currencies were also not in small amounts. And this also meant that Rosen had completely drawn all the hero's skills, gained all the hero's attribute overlays, and still had some left over. After all, the basic skills of 24 heroes combined only required 216 draws. Subtracting the level 1 blink given in the initial new player gift pack, beginner's gift pack, and the previous 38 draws, Rosen only needed to draw 177 more times, which was 1.77 billion. He would still have over 3 billion left. Even if the skull of Gul'dan reappeared, he could easily afford it. He knew these drug lords were rich, but he really didn't know they could be this rich. If he had known earlier, why bother with those guys in New York? He should have come here to make a fortune sooner. But for now, this was the end of it. Because after a while, these drug lords also suddenly caught on, realizing that all the incidents occurred in villas far from the main urban areas. So they all took their wealth and hid in densely populated cities. This made Rosen a little wary. Although with the accumulation of wealth, he already had a certain degree of confidence in being above the law. At least S.H.I.E.L.D., Hydra, and the like, he believed they could no longer pose a threat to him. But for one, he still maintained a certain bottom line. He had no psychological burden killing those associated with drug lords and gangs. But he still held some goodwill towards ordinary people. After all, no matter which world, the lives of ordinary people are already hard enough, there's no need to bring them more harm. Mass killings in a crowded market are too easy to harm the innocent. Even if Rosen could guarantee that his skills wouldn't harm ordinary people, the bullets fired by those armed militants certainly would. Another point was that Rosen had not yet reached a point where he could be completely reckless. At least, Rosen was still very wary of existences like the Ancient One. Don't let it seem like this big shot is only devoted to maintaining the safety of the magic dimension and seems indifferent to everything happening in the physical universe. Even for a major event like the New York invasion, she merely casually cut down a few stragglers. But Rosen couldn't be sure if she might one day have a whim and want to chat with him. After all, among Rosen's powers, there was no shortage of dark power representing demons and undead. And this kind of power naturally falls within the Ancient One, the Sorcerer Supreme's, scope of responsibility. Rosen didn't believe that the Sorcerer Supreme wouldn't know about the commotion he caused in Mexico. It's just that Rosen only massacred drug lords, and his actions were all in remote areas far from city centers, so this big shot might have turned a blind eye. But if Rosen openly used such power to massacre people in densely populated areas, so it's better to continue to be a bit more low-key. Of course, there was another reason why Rosen gave up on continuing to accumulate wealth. That was, the system began to upgrade after Rosen drew all the skills, and the upgrade time actually required a whole year. This surprised Rosen, but also made him look forward to it. Who knows what new features there would be after the upgrade. Fortunately, only the lottery function was upgraded, the mall could still be used. Since that was the case, Rosen saw that a month had passed, and the future Iron Man baby should have suffered enough, so he could be released. And with the Archmage's teleportation skill, Rosen had already placed mechanical critters marked by him in the 5 valleys through Jessica, and directly teleported over. It was incredibly convenient. Soon, Rosen appeared in the 2nd valley he had originally marked. In the dim cave, Tony Stark and Ethan, who had been busy for days, were taking a break to play backgammon together. It seems Cambridge is still not as good as MIT. Tony said triumphantly after winning. It's just that I lost. Ethan shook his head, not wanting to argue too much with Tony. Just then, a burst of gunfire and screams suddenly erupted from outside the door. What's going on? Has the military found this place? Tony was slightly agitated by the commotion outside. Although he had already designed the prototype of the Iron Man suit, it would still take at least another month to officially complete it. If the military could find him and rescue him earlier, that would naturally be for the best. I'm afraid something isn't right. The number of gunshots is a bit low, it doesn't sound like the military. Ethan frowned after listening intently for a while. If it really were the U.S. military that found this place, their firepower would certainly not be limited to this extent. Hearing Ethan's words, Tony also couldn't help but frown. However, something even more surprising happened. In just about a minute, all the gunfire and screams ceased. The entire cave fell into a rather eerie silence. Did someone accidentally wander in and get killed? But that's not right, why is it so quiet? Where are the noisy terrorists? Tony and Ethan exchanged glances, realizing that things were not as simple as they had imagined. Hello? Is anyone there? I need a little help. After a few seconds of thought, Tony stood up and tentatively shouted into the cave's surveillance system. Seeing this, Ethan also immediately stood up and, facing the camera, translated for Tony in the local language. But they received no response. Just as the two were confused. The heavy metal door of the cave, which had isolated them from the world, let out a loud bang, then tilted inward as a whole, raising a cloud of dust. Tony and Ethan coughed, waving away the dust, while warily looking towards the door. As the dust cleared, a figure holding an ornate scepter and shrouded in a long robe appeared before them. Who are you? Tony couldn't hold back and asked. You can call me the Prophet, Tony Stark, I've come for you. The newcomer pulled back the hood covering his head, revealing his face. Who else could it be but Rosen? Prophet. Amos. Hosea. Isaiah. Micah. Hearing Rosen's reply, Tony couldn't help but twitch his lips. Am I in Assyria? No need to be so sarcastic, Tony Stark, it's just a title. I'm here to help you, if you want to leave this place. Rosen said. How did you get in here? Where are those 10 rings guys outside? Tony looked behind Rosen, noticing that no one from the 10 rings had appeared, and couldn't help but ask. You can go out and see for yourselves. Rosen slightly turned, clearing the path to the outside of the cave. Tony and Ethan exchanged glances, then warily walked around Rosen and headed outside. Ethan also quickly followed. Rosen didn't mind, simply following quietly behind them. After exiting the door, Tony quickly saw 2 bodies lying not far from the entrance. Seeing the state of these 2 bodies, Tony's brow furrowed again. Because the way these 2 bodies died was too strange, they were covered in wounds like they had been torn by a beast, with no gunshots or shrapnel wounds whatsoever. That is to say, they weren't killed by weapons, but by some kind of beast. More importantly, the expressions on the faces of the bodies were not just simple pain, but extreme fear, looking extremely distorted. Continuing along the cave passage outwards, all the bodies seen, right up to the valley outside, were in the same state. This left Tony baffled. There weren't any large beasts in Afghanistan, at most wolves or snow leopards, which could barely be considered medium-sized predators. But these 2 types of beasts, let alone facing armed terrorists, even in a one-on-one situation, even an unarmed adult male would struggle to defeat them. Not to mention, it wasn't just 1 or 2 people who died, but hundreds. Did you do all this? How did you do it? After surveying the gruesome scene in the valley, Tony couldn't help but ask Rosen, who was slowly emerging from the cave. Just a little magic, look at that body. A hint of mischief flashed across Rosen's face as he pointed to a body not far from Tony. What is it? Tony had a bad feeling, but curiosity still drew him closer. Seeing this, Ethan also became curious and followed. However, just as the 2 were observing what was so special about that body, the body, which had long since lost all signs of life, suddenly opened its eyes, then stood upright in a very eerie, stiff posture. Yes, just like a Chinese zombie. Death Knight ultimate skill. Control undead. Holy shit. The sudden change scared Tony and Ethan, who scrambled back frantically, then lost their footing and fell backwards, landing on their butts. Even after landing, they instinctively continued to crawl backward. Rosen, the culprit, chuckled at the sight and even had the leisure to pull out a camera from his system space and film Tony's disheveled moment. What the hell is this? You're behind all this. Recovering, Tony, realizing he seemed to have been pranked, yelled at Rosen. Rosen, being yelled at, raised an eyebrow and snapped his fingers. The body suddenly began to contort, growing claws, and opening its gaping maw, leaping in front of Tony for a face-to-face roar. The stench of decay and putrefaction immediately assailed Tony. This transformation was a variant application of Control Undead, turning ordinary corpses into ghouls. Unlike in the game, where Control Undead can only control 6 bodies. In the real world, as long as Rosen has enough magic and enough corpses, he can control as many as he wants. Of course, one, like now, is also possible. He can even make simple modifications to the bodies, such as turning them into ghouls or skeleton warriors. However, higher-level undead, such as constructs like Abomination, would require some other, technical, means. Furthermore, resurrected bodies do not have a time limit like in the game. Instead, like other conventional summons, they are sustained or dismissed with mana according to Rosen's own needs. This means that if Rosen wished, he could even unleash an undead plague in the real world. However, this skill also has a weakened aspect in the real world, that is, the controlled undead are not invincible as they are in the game. Instead, like true undead, ordinary light weapons have little effect on them. Even if injured, as long as their limbs are intact, they can continue to act. But if high-power weapons completely shatter the undead's body, or if they are burned by fire, then they can still be destroyed. Also, the upper limit of the strength of controlled bodies is often related to the strength of the body during its life. God, make him leave. Tony felt like he was going to throw up. The nauseating feeling had completely suppressed his fear. As for Ethan, he had already moved far away from Tony. Although initially startled, after recovering, with his intelligence, he naturally saw that Rosen's actions were purely a prank and had no intention of harming Tony. Otherwise, with the abilities of this prophet, the 2 of them wouldn't have survived until now. Tony, of course, also realized this, and looking at the monster in front of him, it wasn't hard for him to guess how those 10 rings guys had died. As Rosen snapped his fingers again, the ghoul that had just had an intimate encounter with Tony instantly turned into a puddle of rotten flesh and white bones. Of course, Rosen didn't actually need specific movements to cast spells. Snapping his fingers or waving his hand were just extra gestures that Rosen felt made him look more imposing. So you're actually the legendary evil necromancer, right? Why did you save me? Seeing the ghoul disappear, Tony finally let out a sigh of relief, stood up, and asked Rosen. His tone was much better than before, but the displeasure in his eyes was still practically overflowing. There was nothing he could do, circumstances dictated it. Tony could only temporarily back down, he didn't have his Iron Man suit to summon right now. Your mouth. I think you should be very clear that power itself isn't evil, people are, just like the weapons you make. Rosen shook his head, not bothering to torment the guy further, then waved his hand, and 2 milky white rays of light fell upon Tony and Ethan. Tony and Ethan immediately felt as if they were soaking in a hot spring, completely refreshed. All their pain and fatigue vanished. Tony even let out a comfortable groan. What is this now? Tony asked, feeling invigorated. Holy Light Spell, a spell that uses the power of light to heal most injuries and restore stamina. Do you still think I'm an evil necromancer now? Rosen asked teasingly. Holy Light Spell, huh? I didn't feel it very clearly just now. Can you do it again? Tony feigned ignorance. Rosen twitched the corner of his mouth, summoned a water elemental, and had it douse the other party with cold water. Alright, I get it. You're not some evil necromancer, you're a prophet, okay. Facing Rosen's endless tricks, Tony wiped the water from his face, indicating he was convinced, well, at least temporarily convinced. He'd figure out this guy's purpose later. Actually, I quite like your rebellious demeanor. Rosen smiled. Heh tilde then, Mr. Prophet, tell me your purpose. I don't recall ever having dealings with someone like you. I don't believe a word you say, Tony said expressionlessly. Purpose. Just to meet the future savior, but honestly, I'm quite disappointed. Rosen said, sweeping a disdainful glance over Tony. Calling the future Tony a savior was not wrong. At least according to the original plot, the entire universe owed Iron Man a life. Savior. You mean me? Tony frowned, realizing things seemed a bit complicated. Could this guy really be a prophet? So he knew I was the savior. At the same time, there was a faint hint of secret joy in his heart. Savior. As expected of me. Just as Tony's imagination ran wild. With a splash, the water elemental poured another bucket of cold water over Tony's head, bringing him back to his senses. It's not dark yet, so stop daydreaming. Even if you are a savior, that's the future you. The current you doesn't have that qualification. Rosen mocked. Everything you say is right. Tony, unable to resist, rolled his eyes. Then he saw Rosen's staff strike the ground. The cave that had held him captive for over a month was completely consumed by surging flames. What are you doing? Feeling the scorching heat, Tony and Ethan quickly retreated. Of course, I'm cleaning up traces. Don't you realize what kind of consequences it would have if those things you left behind fell into the hands of someone with ill intentions? Rosen retorted. Tony was speechless upon hearing this. He was right. If the blueprints for the first-generation Iron Man suit he left in the cave were obtained by capable individuals, it could indeed lead to undesirable consequences. In the original plot, he had no choice because he urgently needed to escape. But the current situation was different. Alright, stand next to me. Rosen walked to the open space in the center of the valley and then said to Tony and Ethan. What for? Tony asked, puzzled. To take you home. Of course, if you want to stay here, that's fine too. The smell of blood here will probably attract a pack of wolves before long. Rosen chuckled. And as if to confirm his words, distant wolf howls indeed echoed. Frightened, Tony, who had initially been somewhat skeptical of Rosen's offer to take him home, quickly moved closer. Ethan was no exception. In the original plot, although he was willing to sacrifice himself to buy Tony time, that didn't mean he was willing to stay here and be eaten by wolves. The next second, a white light enveloped the three of them. Immediately, their figures completely vanished from the valley. And after they left, Two giant wolves not far from the valley also turned into a mist and disappeared. Beast Prophet skill, Beast Shadow. Effect. Summons two phantom wolves. When Tony and Ethan regained consciousness, what appeared before them were the rooftops of tall buildings. This is New York. This is the roof of my company. Tony looked around and immediately recognized his location. It was actually the rooftop of Stark Industries' New York headquarters. Although at this time he usually lived in Los Angeles and rarely visited the New York headquarters, he wasn't so out of touch as to not recognize his own company. Yes, that's Stark Tower. Although in the original plot, Tony only moved to New York after his seaside villa was destroyed in Iron Man 3. But that doesn't mean Stark Industries Tower was bought after he moved to New York. In fact, Stark Tower, as the group's headquarters, has always been in New York. In the original plot, when Tony first started developing the Mark II Iron Man suit, Obadiah Stane had just finished a board meeting in New York and then took a box of New York pizza to comfort Tony. Even Tony's childhood home was always in New York. On Long Island, Howard Stark was also a New Yorker. The place where Howard and his wife were attacked by the Winter Soldier was also on Long Island. Living in Los Angeles as an adult was largely just an attempt to escape the reality of his parents' death. And the large reactor Howard built was located at a Stark Industries research and development factory in Los Angeles, not the headquarters. God, you're saying we went from Central Asia to New York in an instant? Ethan, beside him, was equally incredulous. If we're not hallucinating, this is New York. Tony nodded in confirmation, then looked at Rosen. Mr. Prophet, thank you very much for saving me. I wonder if I have the honor of buying you a drink. At this moment, he had too many things he wanted to ask Rosen. I can, but I don't drink alcohol. A cappuccino will do, iced. Rosen said. Our Mr. Prophet, surely he's not too young to drink yet. Hearing Rosen say he didn't drink, Tony looked at his slightly youthful face with a strange expression. Well, in a way, Rosen's physical age was just 19. And in the United States, the legal drinking age is 21. Although Tony's intention was to tease, and Rosen's reason for not drinking wasn't his age. But he did hit close to the mark. SHIELD, Triskelion headquarters. Is there still no lead on the spirit of vengeance in Mexico? Nick Fury asked Maria Hill. No leads, but compared to us, the CIA is more anxious. They've lost at least 100 elite agents there, and even though they've practically turned over all of northern Mexico, they still have no information about the spirit of vengeance. Because of this, they've even sent us a collaboration invitation, Maria Hill said, shaking her head. Ha, it's rare for those guys to actively send us a collaboration invitation. Nick Fury sneered slightly upon hearing this. Rosen caused such a stir in northern Mexico, even creating an urban legend of the spirit of vengeance. With SHIELD's capabilities, it was naturally impossible for them to be completely unaware. What's more, such suspected supernatural events are inherently within their jurisdiction. However, regarding the consequences of the series of events involving the spirit of vengeance, the most anxious party was not SHIELD, nor the Mexican government. It was the CIA, the organization that outwardly claims to be the United States' primary intelligence agency. Why? Naturally, it's because over 80% of the drug organizations in northern Mexico had CIA personnel within them. These are commonly known as undercover agents. And when Rosen massacred those drug lords, he naturally cleaned out these undercover agents as well. These are the over 100 elite agents Maria Hill mentioned. However, one thing needs to be clear. These CIA undercover agents were not there to combat drug lords. They were there to make money. Most of them were directly involved in various drug transactions, and many were even high-ranking members of drug lord groups. In fact, if not for their existence, drug trafficking along the US-Mexico border would not be so rampant. After all, when it comes to intelligence, the DIA and similar agencies can't outplay the CIA. The CIA's behavior like this has been going on since the 1960s-1970s. The reason was to raise funds. Because the CIA is the only intelligence agency in the United States that can be said to be completely independent. Other than the U.S. President, the CIA is not accountable to any other agency. In this regard, apart from the non-existent SHIELD, no other agency can compare to it. Even the Department of Homeland Security, nominally overseeing all intelligence agencies after 9/11, has far less independence than the CIA. But this exceptional independence does not come without a price. This price is funding. Although the CIA receives a considerable budget from Congress each year, that budget is merely a drop in the bucket compared to its vast overseas intelligence network. Moreover, many illegal activities simply cannot obtain reasonable funding approval. So what to do? Self-fund. Hence, arms, smuggling, drugs. The CIA's presence is almost indispensable among the leaders of various cross-border black markets worldwide. And drug trafficking in the Central and South American regions is one of the CIA's main sources of income. In other words, Rosen's massacre along the US-Mexico border not only eliminated many CIA agents but also directly cut off one of the CIA's important funding sources. The money and gold Rosen seized, for the CIA, could be described using Emperor Jiaxing's words. "That's all my money." It was precisely for this reason that Nick Fury actually disliked the CIA, the agency where he had once worked, and he joined SHIELD without hesitation when Alexander Pierce extended an invitation to him. So, should we accept their collaboration invitation? Maria Hill, who came from a military background and knew about the CIA's shady dealings, also looked down on this dirty organization. Why not? But let our people be clever, let them do the charging into battle, Nick Fury instructed. Any news from Tony Stark? No news. According to our Homelander, she's practically turned over all of Afghanistan, and she's very dissatisfied about it, Maria Hill said. And why is that? Nick Fury asked, puzzled. She said that as Homelander, her goal is to help the weak and relieve the distressed, not to help invaders fight a counter-insurgency war, even if that invader is her own country. Maria Hill handed a document to Nick Fury. Opening the first page revealed a picture of Jessica Jones, her expression somewhat somber, floating over war ruins. Our Homelander, in her search for Tony Stark over the past month, encountered 47 armed conflicts, rescued 37 soldiers, and also saved over 500 Afghan civilians. However, among these 500 civilians, over 100 were deemed insurgents by the military, leading to considerable conflict between her and the military. Of course, the main dissatisfaction came from the high-ranking officers of the stationed troops, while the ordinary soldiers praised her highly, Maria Hill explained. Nick Fury couldn't help but frown slightly upon hearing this. The Avengers had not even taken shape yet, so he highly valued Jessica, a super-powered individual who had readily agreed to SHIELD's recruitment and was very cooperative in her work. What a troubled time. There's no lead on Black Widow's situation, Tony Stark is kidnapped, and now some spirit of vengeance has emerged, Nick Fury sighed, shaking his head. Since she's unwilling, let her come back. The task of finding Tony Stark can be handed over to others. However, no sooner had Nick Fury finished speaking than the intercom on his desk rang. Nick Fury pressed the answer button, and his subordinate agent's report came through the intercom. Officer, Mr. Stark is back. He's currently at Stark Industries headquarters in New York. What? How did he get back? Hearing the report, Nick Fury and Maria Hill immediately exchanged glances, filled with surprise. Sorry, officer, we don't know. We checked all entry records and found nothing. Mr. Stark seems to have appeared in New York out of thin air. The reporting agent said, his tone inexplicable. I understand. Report any new developments immediately. Nick Fury ordered, then hung up the communication. Officer, what should we do? Maria Hill asked, looking at Nick Fury. Let Coulson and Jessica come back. Also, Sharon Carter should have passed her academy graduation exam by now, right? Nick Fury asked. Yes, and with excellent grades. Her current rank is level 5, but she hasn't officially been on a mission yet, Maria Hill nodded. As the niece of SHIELD's founder, Sharon Carter received considerable attention among the high-ranking officials. Maria Hill naturally couldn't be unaware. Then let her make contact with Stark. I want to know what exactly happened to Stark. Nick Fury said. Isn't this a bit inappropriate? Maria Hill frowned slightly upon hearing this. After all, Tony Stark's reputation at this time was truly terrible, and Sharon Carter was still a young woman. This mission, no matter how one looked at it, felt like throwing good money after bad. Moreover, Sharon Carter was not the type of female agent who specialized in using her looks. Her identity also ensured that SHIELD High Command could not force her to carry out such tasks. Ms. Hill, this is just a regular field assignment, don't overthink it. Nick Fury glanced at Maria Hill and said. Had he asked Sharon Carter how to carry out this mission? Of course not. But if Sharon Carter figured it out herself, that was none of his business. Mr. Stark, your cheeseburger. Sir, your coffee. Mr. Ethan, your juice. Inside the luxurious lounge of Stark Industries' CEO office, several female employees from the public relations department delivered the food and drinks requested by the three men to each of them. Oh, God, I've been craving this for so long. Tony, who had already showered and changed, picked up the cheeseburger in front of him and took a big bite. Many wealthy individuals set up lounges in their offices, not to mention a top billionaire like Tony Stark. The facilities in the lounge were even more complete than a presidential suite in a five-star hotel. Even if Tony Stark, the CEO, might not visit the headquarters building once a year. But everything that should be there was not missing at all. In my impression, you don't seem like someone who would enjoy this kind of food. Ethan, who had also freshened up, said with some surprise, looking at Tony's satisfied expression. Then what kind of food should I like? Red wine, truffles, caviar. Honestly, those things really don't provide as much satisfaction as a burger or pizza. Tony swallowed his burger and shrugged. That's because you've been eating those things since you were a child, and you're already tired of them, so only the stimulating sensation of food additives can bring you enough novelty. Rosen took a sip of coffee and said unhurriedly. Ah, I think so too. Hearing Rosen's words, Ethan felt he was right. Although what you said is true, I really hate your tone. Tony said helplessly upon hearing this. He didn't refute what Rosen said, because it was the truth. Burgers, pizzas, and the like were fine for an occasional novelty, but if he had to eat them for several meals, he'd rather not. Oh, Tony, it's great to see you back safe and sound. I've already notified Pepper and Hogan, and they're on their way from Los Angeles, but how exactly did you suddenly appear here? Just as the three were eating, drinking, and chatting, the lounge door opened again, and a very tall, bald white man walked in, gave Tony a big hug, and then said excitedly. It was Obadiah Stane, the CEO of Stark Industries. As for Tony himself, he had been the chairman of Stark Industries since his father, Howard, passed away. Aside from occasionally participating in the company's project research and some public events, he, as chairman, rarely participated in the company's specific affairs. It was precisely because of this that he had never discovered the things Obadiah Stane was doing in secret. Thank you, Obadiah's nickname, but let's talk about this later. Right now, I need to hold a press conference. Tony waved his hand and said. A press conference. Ah, yes, a press conference is indeed needed to announce your return. You have no idea how much impact your disappearance has caused. Hearing Tony say he wanted to hold a press conference, Obadiah was a little surprised, but quickly reacted and expressed his support. Do you want to close the weapons division? Just then, Rosen spoke. Shit, you really are my other. Tony heard Rosen's words and complained speechlessly again. However, he was interrupted by Rosen before he could finish his sentence. Shut up, if you say that word, I don't mind sending you back to the cave. Rosen warned. Who are you? Wait, Tony, what did he say? You want to close the weapons division. Do you know what we do? We are weapon manufacturers. Hearing Rosen speak, Obadiah finally realized there were other people in the lounge, but compared to Rosen and Ethan, these, unimportant, people, his attention was immediately drawn to the phrase about closing the weapons division. He immediately looked at Tony with an incredulous expression and said. I know, Obi, I just don't want to continue at the cost of human lives too. Tony argued. But you have to know that's our duty. Obadiah also emphasized. Clap, clap, clap. Their argument was quickly stopped by a round of applause. Whether the weapons division is closed or not is none of my business, but now I have something else I want to explain, Rosen said to Tony. Oh, of course, Mr. Prophet, go ahead. Tony nodded. Tony, who is he? Why do you call him Prophet? Obadiah was puzzled. Tony was never an easy person to obey. But now he was listening so intently to a strange young man. This made him very curious. Mr. Obadiah, who I am is not important. What's important is that you're going to have a lot of bad luck very soon. Rosen took a sip of coffee and said with a smile. Whoa, Tony calls you prophet. Do you really tell fortunes? Ha 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 ha, then I'm really looking forward to it. So tell me, how am I going to have bad luck? Obadiah said, laughing uncontrollably. Prophet. Such a wet behind the ears kid. This was truly the biggest joke of the century. But very quickly, he stopped laughing. Rosen merely waved his hand, and a laptop appeared out of thin air in front of him. Then Rosen operated it briefly and displayed the screen to the three of them. It was a video of Tony Stark being kidnapped, the same video from the original plot where Tony asked Pepper to find it in Obadiah's office. It also came with translation software. You didn't tell us the target of the assassination was Tony Stark, Obadiah Stane, you will pay for your lies. As soon as these words came out of the video, Tony Stark's gaze towards Obadiah instantly changed. What he experienced was not a kidnapping, but an assassination. And the mastermind was his good uncle, Obadiah, who had watched him grow up. This made Tony Stark unable to accept it for a while. Tony, trust me, this is a fabrication. Given my relationship with your father, how could I do such a thing? This so-called prophet is just a liar. After a moment of stiffness, Obadiah instantly put on a smile again, arguing while seemingly casually approaching Tony. Clearly, Obadiah, knowing that his actions were exposed, had made the desperate decision to take a risk in a very short time. Now, it was too late for him to do anything else, he could only choose to take Tony hostage to have a slim chance of survival. However, Tony quickly reacted and wanted to retreat. But by this time, Obadiah was already too close to him. Once Obadiah held Tony hostage, with Obadiah's burly physique, it would not be easy to break free. However, it was clear that Obadiah did not realize what kind of existence Rosen, who exposed him, truly was. Rosen merely snapped his fingers, and Obadiah felt his consciousness become hazy. He then collapsed to the ground, falling into a deep sleep. Dreadlord's skill. Sleep. Puts a target to sleep. A sleeping target may be awakened if subjected to extreme stimulation. The effect was basically consistent with the game, but more powerful. Rosen had already tried it. The affected target would sleep very deeply, and ordinary disturbances would be difficult to wake them. Moreover, it was not like in the game where they would definitely wake up if attacked. Instead, it required sufficient intensity. For example, actions like a light clap were basically useless. Overall, it was quite similar to Mantis's ability. Inside the lounge, Tony's expression was incredibly grim. When Rosen first presented the evidence that Obadiah Stane was the one who tried to murder him, he still harbored a sliver of doubt, then Obadiah's subsequent actions had already dispelled his last trace of suspicion. He felt extremely distressed by this. Because in the more than 10 years since his father's death, it was truly Obadiah Stane who had looked after him in many ways and helped him consolidate his power within the company. Therefore, Tony had always placed great trust in this uncle. This was evident from the fact that Obadiah was allowed to freely enter and exit Tony's residence. For Tony, who had lacked a sense of security since childhood, only 3 people had ever been granted this privilege. These 3 people were Pepper, Rhodes, and Obadiah. Even his trusted bodyguard, Happy Hogan, did not have this qualification. What? You mean Nick Fury? He hacked his way in, he wasn't granted permission. This shows the extent of Tony's trust in Obadiah. But now, such a person, almost like family, had betrayed him. This left Tony's heart filled with disappointment. For a moment, he even felt a flicker of distrust towards Pepper and Rhodes, who were not present. Perhaps, given the things he had done, he deserved to be a lonely man. Tony thought, feeling very dejected. Look what I found. Our great genius isn't going to think the whole world has betrayed him just because one person did, is he? Just as Tony was sinking into despair, Rosen started to mock him. Thank you, Prophet, you've helped me again. Faced with Rosen's mockery, Tony, who was deep in despair, surprisingly didn't retaliate for once, but thanked him earnestly. With Rosen having saved Tony twice now, he seemed to have accepted Rosen's identity as a prophet. Mr. Tony Stark, please rein in your emotions. You are an adult nearing 40, not a baby who needs to be coaxed. Look forward more. Betrayers are hateful, but don't let that make you fail the people around you. Rosen said, shaking his head. Tony Stark's character was not problematic, even before becoming Iron Man, as a super-rich second generation, apart from a slightly dissolute private life, all consensual, not looking at people properly, and liking to speak carelessly, he genuinely hadn't actively done anything heinous. He was just prone to emotional swings, like a giant baby, easily falling into self-doubt, and very lacking in security. This might be due to a lack of paternal affection from a young age. It was also because of this emotional instability that it took 17 years for him and Pepper to officially get together. Poor Happy had also kept their ring safe for a full 17 years. Fail the people around me. Prophet, what do you mean? Tony was very smart and immediately understood Rosen's implication. Alright, to be honest, I'm really not suited to be a prophet, riddles are too tiring. Pepper is a good wife, Rhodes and Hogan are trustworthy good friends, oh, and of course, Ethan is also a good mentor and friend. Rosen said very directly. Riddles are too tiring, he's not pretending anymore. Hearing Rosen's words, Ethan, who was beside them, was very surprised, he hadn't expected his name to be brought up. Tony was equally surprised. Rosen mentioning Pepper, Rhodes, and Hogan instantly relaxed him mentally, but it wasn't too unexpected. However, Ethan was different. After all, with Rosen's intervention, Ethan hadn't sacrificed himself for Tony, so their friendship still remained at the cellmate level. Actually, even without my intervention, you would have escaped the 10 Rings gang using the big toy you designed, but it would have been discovered during the startup phase, and Ethan would have actively sacrificed himself to buy you time. Rosen described the future without his presence to Tony and Ethan. Hearing Rosen's words, Tony's gaze towards Ethan immediately changed. Ethan, on the other hand, fell into a brief silence. Because he knew that if the situation Rosen described truly happened, he really might make that choice, after all. Ethan, it's the same for you. Although your home is gone, there are still many more people like you losing their homes. I also know you want to change everything by changing Tony, but honestly, given this guy's unreliability, I think it's better to have you keeping an eye on him. Rosen then said to Ethan. What? Your home is gone. You didn't say that before. Tony looked at Ethan, extremely surprised, not even caring that Rosen called him unreliable. Because he never planned to live. Rosen said, for him, if his sacrifice could awaken a fallen soul and turn him into someone who could change this world, then he would die a worthy death. And in fact, in the world without me, he did exactly that. Ethan chuckled twice upon hearing this, he really hadn't thought that far ahead. He just felt at the time that a genius like Tony shouldn't perish in that cave, so he just wanted to motivate him. Tony, however, fell silent because of Rosen's words. But after a few seconds, Tony, who had been pondering Rosen's words, suddenly realized something and looked at Rosen with a horrified expression. What did you mean by, the world without you, just now? Ethan, hearing Tony's question, also froze and looked at Rosen with similar uncertainty. Literally. Rosen raised an eyebrow. As expected of Iron Man, you grasped the key point so quickly. Parallel universe. I see. So everything you've said happened in a parallel universe. Tony subconsciously swallowed. As an excellent scientist, how could Tony not know about the parallel universe theory? You can understand it that way, but you also need to know that every universe is not immutable, so some things, I won't say, and you don't need to ask too much. Rosen nodded. Actually, before the dark portal appeared in the mall, he hadn't planned to contact Tony, Iron Man, so early, nor would he have told him about the existence of parallel universes so soon. But after the dark portal appeared, the situation changed a bit. Countless different universes represent countless different possibilities. Since he had come to the Marvel Universe, whether it was the pride of a transmigrator or other reasons, Rosen always wanted to explore the multiverse, and even higher realms. But obviously, if he relied solely on himself, even with the system's help, facing the endless multiverse would clearly be somewhat stretched. Moreover, he hadn't even touched the edge of a single universe yet. At such a time, some reliable helpers were very necessary. And among the Marvel heroes, was there really a better choice than Iron Man, who was excellent in all aspects and more human? Could it be that he would choose that inhuman popsicle from the North Pole? Of course, it's not to say that popsicle was useless. In some aspects, the other party still had a certain utilitarian value. But at least in terms of developing the multiverse, Rosen didn't think a World War II antique who traveled the world with just a shield could play much of a role. The matter of the multiverse, there's no great point in discussing it with you much right now, because even in the universe we currently reside in, there are still many crises that need to be dealt with, and in this process, your choice is of paramount importance. Rosen said. My choice. Oh, of course, after all, I'm the savior. No matter what crisis, I believe I can handle it with ease. Tony proudly raised his head. Actually, at this moment, he was a little panicked deep down. After all, he had just escaped from the cave and was looking forward to a good rest after getting out. But how did it suddenly involve parallel universes and world crises? However, being the proud person he was, he would absolutely not show this panic, at least not verbally. I hope so. Your matters here, once Obadiah is dealt with, can be considered temporarily concluded. The next thing you need to do is very simple. Quickly consolidate the power of Stark Industries, and don't forget to update and upgrade the toy you designed in the cave, then go out and make an appearance. Although I've already dealt with most of the 10 Rings gang's armed forces, there are still quite a few remnants, and those are for you to handle. Rosen stood up and said, then pointed to Obadiah, who was sleeping soundly, as for this guy, I'm taking him with me. After speaking, he summoned a water elemental and had it lift Obadiah. You're taking him. Hearing that Rosen wanted to take him, Tony couldn't help but frown, a little unwilling. After all, this guy wanted to kill him, and in Tony's inherent belief, he should be locked in prison until he died. That's right, whether it was the original timeline or now. Even after knowing the truth, Tony never had the thought of killing Obadiah as soon as possible. Instead, he wanted to send him to prison. Just like he later did to Ivan Vanko for the first time. Otherwise, send him to prison. Have you ever thought that with his status, even in prison, he'd still live very comfortably, and would he have other accomplices? Or even in the future, would someone use him to target you? Rosen retorted. You're right, but where do you plan to take him? Faced with Rosen's retort, Tony couldn't help but fall into a brief silence before asking. You can rest assured about that. Trust me, you won't see him in this world again. Rosen replied, as for how to explain it to the outside, I think fleeing in fear of punishment might be a good reason. I understand. I'll handle the follow-up. Tony nodded. He thought that when Rosen said he wouldn't let him see Obadiah in this world, he meant he was going to kill him or turn him into some inhuman, ghost-like thing. Then, see you later. After convincing Tony, the white light of group teleportation began to envelop Rosen and Obadiah, who was still in a deep sleep. Wait, Prophet, how do I contact you? Seeing Rosen about to leave, Tony hastily asked. My name is Rosen. I don't think it should be difficult for Stark Industries to find out my identity and phone number. Before leaving, Rosen finally said his name for the first time, then disappeared from the lounge. Rosen, huh. I understand. Tony nodded, then got up and walked out the door. Someone, come here. Notify everyone that I'm holding a board meeting and a press conference. Also, please call the police for me. After Rosen left Stark Industries, he returned home and opened the dark portal to Universe 96283. That's right, he took Obadiah away not to destroy his body and evidence, as Tony thought. Instead, he was going to send him to Little Spider's universe. And Obadiah was precisely the person Rosen had previously mentioned to Norman Osborn, intending to arrange him into the Osborn group. This was something he had planned from the beginning. Although Obadiah's character was not great, as a businessman and manager, he was absolutely qualified. And only such a person could handle Norman Osborn, who was also a qualified businessman, with ease. As for whether Obadiah would be obedient, Rosen was not worried. Although as the main villain of the first Iron Man movie, Obadiah was not a non-critical Destiny character who could be controlled by the Dark Ranger's skill, talisman. But Rosen believed that Obadiah, as someone who could hide beside the Stark father and son, diligently for over 40 years without revealing his ambition, would be a person who knew how to adapt to circumstances. Moreover, in an alternate universe, with Obadiah having no foundation whatsoever, relying on Rosen was his only option. Coupled with the fact that Rosen would also use Talisman to control some other mid to high level personnel in the Osborne group, the probability of Obadiah and Norman trying to do something behind his back was basically zero. After spending some time, using both persuasion and coercion to make Obadiah understand his situation, Rosen handed him over to Norman Osborne. Norman Osborne would naturally handle subsequent matters like his identity. Rosen did not rush to leave afterwards but went to see Natasha, whom he had left there earlier to sort out her identity and educate Little Spider. However, when Rosen found them and learned about their current situation, he was very surprised. I really didn't expect you to choose such a profession. Rosen teased Natasha, who had just finished a photoshoot. In this world, Natasha had not changed her name, but her career choice was very unexpected for Rosen. That's right, Natasha's current profession was actually an actress and model. So much so that when he discovered this, Rosen felt as if he had returned to the world before he transmigrated, seeing the actress who played Natasha. This was truly. And what also surprised Rosen was Little Spider. Now, besides occasionally working as a freelance photographer for the Daily Bugle, taking pictures of Spider-Man, he was also the exclusive photographer for Natasha Romanoff, the rising new actress. I think this profession is great. I can appear openly in any media, and it gives me a very different feeling. Natasha said happily. Clearly, she liked her new profession very much. Although she had also worked as a model in the main universe, for example, in the original plot, the resume submitted to Tony. But those were all fabricated for missions, and she used aliases. However, now, Natasha was using her real name, openly enjoying life under the spotlight. Ms. Romanoff, the follow-up work has been completed. I'll organize the photos later. For now, I won't disturb you and this gentleman Tilda. Just as Rosen and Natasha were chatting, Peter Parker, who had finished the remaining work, walked over and said to Natasha. It's a pleasure to meet you, Spider-Man, my name is Rosen. Looking at the somewhat shy little spider standing before him, Rosen smiled and directly called out his identity. Upon hearing Rosen's words, Peter instantly tensed up and looked at Natasha. He thought Natasha had revealed his identity. A little over a month ago, a few days after Rosen left this universe, Natasha, following Rosen's instructions, saved Ben Parker, who would have been killed by the robber Flint Marko in the original plot, on the night Little Spider went to fight in the black market. Thus, she entered Little Spider's life, and during their interaction, she proactively exposed Little Spider's abilities and became Little Spider's mentor, helping him familiarize himself with his abilities and ultimately leading Peter to become Spider-Man, earlier than in the original timeline. There was no other way. With Natasha's abilities, it was simply too easy to gain the trust of the innocent Little Spider. However, it was also with Natasha's help that the current Little Spider still has his uncle and aunt intact. At the same time, during Rosen's absence, Little Spider officially graduated from high school. On his first day of graduation, Natasha arranged a part-time job as a photographer for him. This job was a cover Natasha created for him, and also a reason to provide financial assistance. Otherwise, if Little Spider was out all day, Ben Parker would surely suspect that he was getting into trouble, just like in the original plot. And with the income from his part-time photography job, Little Spider wouldn't have to live as frugally during college as he did in the original plot. It was precisely this series of reasons that led Little Spider's trust and respect for Natasha to, in some ways, even surpass that for his uncle and aunt. After all, the Parkers didn't know that their nephew was the recently renowned Spider-Man. In fact, if it weren't for the fact that this world's Little Spider, besides being a hero, had already set his heart on Mary Jane, he would probably have fallen directly in love with Natasha. After all, under normal circumstances, Natasha's charm was something an innocent young boy like Little Spider couldn't resist. So, Little Spider absolutely couldn't believe that his incredibly trusted teacher would betray him. Don't look at me like that. I didn't tell him your identity. Rosen is my boss, and he is also a magic user. There is very little in this world that he doesn't know. Natasha explained. A magic user. Like Gandalf. Hearing Natasha's words, Peter was very surprised but didn't doubt her. This showed his level of trust in Natasha. With just an explanation, he immediately believed her. Gandalf isn't a magic user, he's a wizard, a Maya. While I'm also good at close combat, what I can do isn't just limited to illumination spells. Hearing Peter's example, Rosen couldn't help but joke. I'm sorry, Mr. Rosen, I've never met a magic user. Peter scratched his head and said. There's no need to apologize for something that isn't your fault, Peter. Let's go somewhere else for a drink, this isn't the place to talk. Rosen said. This was the site where Natasha was having her photo shoot. Although it was secluded, there were still some passers-by, and other staff members were doing cleanup work. Rosen and they could only speak in hushed tones. I'm very sorry, Mr. Rosen, but it's getting late, and I promised my uncle and aunt I'd be home for dinner today. Faced with Rosen's invitation, Peter hesitated and declined. He was actually quite curious about Rosen, the magic user Natasha spoke of. But he had indeed promised to go home for dinner today. Moreover, it was quite far from his home, and even if he swung back with his webs, it would take a lot of time. If he encountered anything else on the way, he would break his promise again. I see. Well, let's chat another time then. But it's quite far from your home here, I'll give you a ride back. Rosen recalled the poor little spider's various tardiness records in the original plot and didn't press the issue. No need to trouble yourself, I can get back on my own, very quickly. Peter refused. Even though Natasha had said Rosen was a magic user, Peter still subconsciously assumed that Rosen's offer to take him home meant by car. For him, this would not only trouble Rosen but also wouldn't be as fast as him swinging back himself. After all, New York, as one of the largest cities in the world, had very severe traffic conditions, not to mention it was rush hour now. Peter, you have to believe that magic is never an inconvenience. Come with me, you'll be home very soon. As soon as Rosen saw Peter's hesitant attitude, he understood what he was thinking and said with a mysterious smile. Seeing that Rosen had said so much, Peter really couldn't say much more. So he followed Rosen and Natasha to an uninhabited corner. Then, with a flash of white light, when the three reappeared, they were already in an uninhabited alley near Peter's house. Just like the large number of mechanical small animals Rosen had placed in the main universe, for convenience, he had also deployed many mechanical small animals in New York in this world. And as the protagonist of this world, the areas where Peter Parker frequently appeared would certainly not be without the presence of these small animals. So, teleportation was naturally very convenient. This is truly amazing. Seeing the familiar street, Peter excitedly exclaimed, this is much more convenient than web slinging. The place where they had been shooting before was dozens of kilometers away from Peter's home. This feeling was very exciting for Peter. Mr. Rosen, can I learn magic? In his excitement, Peter subconsciously blurted out. Kid, you haven't even fully developed your own powers yet, so don't think about all these other things. Before Rosen could answer, Natasha spoke up with a gentle reprimand. However, her intention in saying this was not to blame Peter, but to protect him. Although she had now submitted to Rosen, the time they had been in contact was still relatively short, so she hadn't fully grasped the moods of this new boss. She didn't want Peter to offend Rosen with his words. After all, she was quite fond of this innocent young man, Peter. Of course, this fondness was merely the affection of an elder for a junior. I'm sorry, madam, I was impulsive. Faced with Natasha's rebuke, Peter shrank his head and realized his presumption. Peter, it's not that I won't teach you, it's just that learning magic requires talent. But don't be discouraged, your abilities far exceed your imagination. Use them well, and you will still be a great person. Rosen smiled, glanced at Natasha, and then said. Although he didn't say it explicitly, he implicitly rejected Peter. However, he certainly wouldn't blame Peter for such a remark. After all, anyone who saw the wonder of magic would have the urge to learn it. After sending off the naive little spider, Rosen took Natasha and teleported back to her residence in this world, a luxurious apartment in Manhattan. As Rosen's subordinate, Natasha naturally didn't forget to follow Rosen's instructions and place the mechanical critters he gave her in her home and other places she frequently stayed. She even carried one with her at all times. This was also why Rosen was able to find her immediately after arriving in this world. Of course, she was also well aware that these mechanical critters were, to some extent, Rosen's surveillance of her. However, having grown accustomed to life in the Red Room, she was completely unconcerned by this level of surveillance. After all, compared to her current free life, this degree of surveillance was nothing at all. In fact, she quite liked these mechanical critters, even treating a few of the fluffy ones as pets. Aside from their core, these mechanical critters looked almost identical to real animals, and she didn't have to waste time feeding them, scooping their poop, or worry about them getting sick or dying unexpectedly. They were even easier to raise than cacti. I didn't expect you to be quite so good at enjoying yourself, Rosen said, sitting down on the sofa without ceremony and freely surveying the furnishings in the apartment. Clearly, with the enormous wealth Rosen had left her, the Black Widow hadn't stinted on herself at all. Not only did she live in a mansion and drive luxury cars every day. Even her talent agency, which managed her as a star, was her own, and besides serving herself, it also signed many other minor celebrities and models. It was precisely because of this that her work was so pleasant and free, without having to deal with the restrictions of an agent or anything like that. Nor did she have to attend various social events like typical minor celebrities. Of course, in the time since she established her company, there hadn't been a lack of clueless individuals who wanted to get close to her through various means. After all, the entertainment industry is always full of various sordid affairs, especially for women. However, at such times, Natasha would let those people know what a Black Widow was. After all, you didn't stipulate that I wasn't allowed to enjoy myself, did you? Money is meant to be spent. Natasha completely ignored Rosen's teasing, took off her jacket, revealing the incredibly romantic top underneath, and then unceremoniously straddled Rosen. You've been gone for over a month. I was worried you'd forgotten me after leaving me in this world. Besides completing the tasks you assigned, all I could do was rely on money to numb myself. That's a good reason, but is this how you Black Widows report to your boss? Rosen hadn't expected Natasha to do something like this, and for a moment, he felt a little awkward. But he wasn't a novice, after all, and quickly recovered, then teased her. Of course not, it's just that I feel a simple employer-employee relationship isn't stable enough, and I don't want to lose my current free life, so I think perhaps we could establish a more intimate relationship between us, what do you think? Natasha pressed against Rosen, whispering in his ear. After coming to this world, while enjoying life, Natasha had actually spent a lot of time thinking about her relationship with Rosen. First, she witnessed the power of Black Panther and Jessica. Later, she witnessed Rosen's mysterious magic, equipment, and his ability to travel between parallel universes, which was beyond imagination. After coming to this world, there was also a superhuman like Spider-Man. All of this made Natasha very clear that her once proud agent abilities as the most outstanding Black Widow of her time were actually nothing to an existence like Rosen. The things he asked her to do could basically be done by any Black Widow trainee in the Red Room. Even most of the ordinary agents from other intelligence organizations could do them. Her greater value might only be limited to what Rosen had said before, providing him with intelligence on the Red Room, eliminating Dreykov, and taking control of the Red Room. But what after that? Would she be abandoned once she lost her additional value? Would she be replaced by other Black Widows? Before experiencing her current life, Natasha might not have worried about losing it. But the problem was, she had gained it, and she didn't want to lose it. So, she thought, and realized that what she had left that could move Rosen was probably just herself. Of course, she was also very aware that it was unrealistic to expect Rosen to have much genuine affection for her through this method, and she didn't hope for that. But for Natasha, as long as she could make Rosen like her in his physical memory, that was enough. And for her, who had learned countless seductive techniques in the Red Room, she was very confident in this. Right. Once she had thought it through, Natasha made her decision without hesitation. She just waited for Rosen to return. What she hadn't expected was that Rosen would be gone for a whole month. She had thought Rosen would be back at least every 10 days to half a month. So, when she said she was worried Rosen had forgotten her, it wasn't a lie. It was precisely because of this that when Rosen came to this world again, and when the two were alone, Natasha unhesitatingly made her intentions clear. Haha, I think you're trying to climb over my head. It seems I'll have to give you a profound lesson. Faced with Natasha's sudden frankness, feeling the warmth from her skin, Rosen was somewhat surprised but didn't refuse. After all, he wasn't some upright gentleman or pure love warrior. Why would he not eat meat that was delivered right to his doorstep? So, he immediately turned from passive to active, intending to teach Natasha a lesson. Natasha showed no fear of Rosen's challenge. She had sensed Rosen's momentary hesitation just now. Coupled with Rosen's slightly youthful face, it made her believe that Rosen was someone lacking in combat experience. Would she be afraid of such an opponent? However, as the battle continued, Natasha felt something was wrong. Because Rosen not only showed no signs of being unable to cope, but he didn't even show the slightest hint of fatigue. Are you really human? Natasha, completely exhausted and having lost all combat capability, looked at Rosen as if he were a monster. Of course, I'm a pure-blooded human, it's just that you're too weak. Rosen shrugged and stopped his attack. Black Widow was indeed a Black Widow. As a super agent, she not only displayed an endless array of combat techniques, which greatly broadened Rosen's horizons, but her grasp of combat details was also far beyond what ordinary people could achieve. Compared to her, Jessica had no advantages except for stamina. If it had been the previous Rosen, facing a Black Widow at full combat power, he might not have been able to last very long. It was just a pity that the current Rosen had already activated the skills of all heroes and inherited their peak attributes. His physical attributes had reached the terrifying levels of 987 strength, 657 agility, and 890 intelligence. Although he hadn't yet encountered a comparable opponent, Rosen estimated that he shouldn't be much worse than Hulk or Thor in their initial forms, and might even be stronger. Under such absolute physical dominance, no matter how strong Natasha's combat skills were, she couldn't be his opponent. However, although Natasha didn't gain any advantage in the battle, her goal was basically achieved. Her combat skills had gained Rosen's approval. If only Natasha's physical attributes were a bit stronger, that would be even better. But this wasn't a big problem, it should be resolved very soon. Rosen stood by the window, looking at the distant Osborne building with its flashing neon lights, and thought. Respected Mr. Rosen, welcome to the Osborne Group again. Outside the Osborne Group building, Norman Osborne, who had been notified, had been waiting at the group's main entrance for Rosen's arrival. Long time no see, Norman. Let me introduce you. This is Obadiah Stane. In the future, he will be my representative, permanently stationed at the Osborne Group. Have you prepared everything I asked for? Rosen nodded, then pointed at Obadiah, who had been reformed by him, and introduced him to Norman Osborne. Of course, all relevant documents and procedures for Mr. Stane are ready. From now on, he will be the group's executive director. It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Stane. Norman naturally recognized Obadiah. After all, Rosen had sent him photos and some basic information in advance, allowing him to enrich Obadiah's identity information in this world. And such things were not new to Norman, as he had done the same for Rosen before. Of course, as for the specific origins of Rosen and Obadiah, it was impossible for him not to be curious. However, as a successful businessman, Norman was very good at knowing his place, understanding what to ask and what not to ask. This was not just due to Rosen's deterrence. It was also because Rosen had brought him tangible benefits. It's also a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Osborne. I believe we will have a pleasant cooperation. Obadiah said with a genial expression. Obadiah, who had earned the trust of the Stark father and son for decades, was also an old fox. Without external pressure, if these two were to come together, it would normally not be a good thing, they would fight each other to the death. However, with Rosen's presence, the ones who should be getting headaches are the other military-industrial groups in this world, led by Exploration Aerospace Group. How are the few things I asked you to do earlier? Rosen asked Norman as he entered the office Osborne had prepared for him. Of course, Dr. Connors and Dr. Octopus have agreed to the group's investment and have each established laboratories. Of course, everything is strictly according to your instructions and is still in the theoretical verification stage for now, Norman Osborn replied, taking out the pre-prepared documents and placing them in front of Rosen. As a transmigrator, Rosen naturally couldn't forget Dr. Octopus, also known as Dr. Otto Octavius, the main villain in the second movie, and his obsession, nuclear fusion. Although in the Marvel Universe, there was already the arc reactor. Rosen himself had also developed a vibranium energy core. However, technology has never developed along a single line. Although nuclear fusion, like the arc reactor, belongs to nuclear fusion devices. The former is thermonuclear fusion, while the latter is cold fusion. Undoubtedly, Tony's arc reactor is safer and more controllable, containing a higher level of technology. After all, whether it's in terms of ability or the era gap, Iron Man completely overwhelms Dr. Octopus. But Dr. Octopus's nuclear fusion technology is not without its merits, at least in terms of energy generation and output power, it is theoretically higher than the arc reactor. And besides this, there is another very important point. If nuclear fusion technology is officially completed, its cost and mass production difficulty will be far lower than that of arc reactor technology. Don't let the fact that nuclear fusion reactors require tritium, an extremely rare element on Earth, deceive you. But it's important to know that tritium is not rare at all on the Moon and in the universe. So, in the future, if Earth enters the interstellar era, nuclear fusion is very suitable for large-scale industrialization. The only problem is that Dr. Octopus's nuclear fusion technology is not perfect. He himself does not currently have the ability to perfect it. However, this point is easy for Rosen to solve. Take it to the main universe and let Tony Stark solve it. As for Dr. Connors, he was an unexpected surprise for Rosen. Because Dr. Connors was originally a villain in The Amazing Spider-Man and had not officially appeared in Tobey Little Spider's world. However, when investigating Dr. Octopus earlier, Rosen discovered that Dr. Connors also existed in this world, and both were colleagues at Empire State University, and this university was precisely the one Tobey Little Spider was admitted to, located in New York. However, at this time, Dr. Connors had not received any funding, and the regeneration serum was still theoretical. And for his research, Rosen had the same idea: take the basic data and give it to Tony Stark. In Rosen's view, this was the correct way to utilize Tony Stark. Later, when entering other multiverse, any valuable but incomplete technology should be thrown to Tony, there's no doubt he'll handle it. Facing the documents Norman handed over, Rosen merely glanced at them and then handed them to Obadiah, who was beside him. Obadiah began to read them carefully. As the newly appointed executive director of the group, he naturally needed to learn more about the company's newly launched projects. I have to say, Mr. Rosen, these two projects you recommended are of extraordinary significance, and their prospects even far exceed those of the human enhancement serum. Norman Osborn praised these two projects. However, according to calculations, the investment in these two projects will probably be an astronomical figure. Don't worry about that. Organize all the technical data for these two projects, as well as the human enhancement serum and the single-person glider, and give me a copy. I want to take it with me. Rosen waved his hand. Sir, these technologies are not yet mature. Using them rashly would carry great risks. Hearing Rosen's request, Norman Osborn was somewhat surprised, thinking Rosen wanted to conduct private research. Don't overthink it. Just as you said, these technologies are very immature, but I know someone, and I believe he can solve the problems within them very well, which will greatly save us research time and money. Rosen explained. Obadiah, hearing Rosen's words, immediately knew who he was referring to. He quietly closed the documents in his hand and said, if it's that guy, he can indeed solve the problems very well. Besides that, I've also brought some technical data. You should produce some samples as soon as possible. I believe the military will be very happy to procure some. Rosen said, gesturing to Obadiah. Seeing this, Obadiah also cooperatively took out the laptop he had brought and began to show it to Norman. And the first piece of technical data that appeared on the laptop screen was none other than Tony's masterpiece, the Jericho missile, which was the best-selling product in the main universe before Stark Industries closed its weapons division. God, these weapons are too practical. With these technologies, in 3 years at most, I can put exploration aerospace out of business. Norman Osborn was so excited he was almost incoherent. looking at the array of weapons and equipment Obadiah displayed. Don't be so excited. These technologies are nothing. As long as you cooperate with me, it's only a matter of time before Osborne Group becomes the greatest group in this world. But there won't be any problems with production, right? Rosen said. As the former CEO of Stark Industries, Obadiah had backups of almost all the technical data the group had ever possessed. When Rosen took Obadiah away, he also brought these technical documents with him. Anyway, with production in this world, Tony Stark wouldn't be able to know. And the technology for these weapons could be said to be overwhelming for Tobey's Spider-Man world, which was still in 2002. With these weapon documents, if Norman Osborn still couldn't dominate the entire U.S. military-industrial complex, then Rosen would have to consider finding another partner. Especially since the United States was about to start a new war in 2003, which was a good time to secure orders. Of course, whether it was to prevent the U.S. from dominating or due to his personal feelings as someone from the East in his previous life, Rosen did not give all the data to Norman Osborn. He also had Obadiah compile some targeted technologies and anonymously send them to the other side of the Pacific. And besides military technology, there were also many advanced civilian technologies from the main universe, which Obadiah would gradually introduce and showcase in this world ahead of time. Such as smartphones. At this point, Jobs in this timeline was still busy with his iPod and iTunes music store. Of course there won't be any problems. Although these pieces of equipment are advanced, with Osborne Group's production technology level, they can be completely replicated. I'll have people adjust the production line immediately to start producing samples. I believe the military will be very generous when faced with these weapons. Norman quickly scanned the technical documents and found that although the weapon parameters were very advanced, the production technology did not create a generational gap for Osborne Group. At most, the production cost might be a bit higher. But Norman Osborn didn't care about this increase in cost at all. He could always earn it back twofold from the military. Go busy yourself. Send me the technical documents I need as soon as possible. I won't be staying here for long. Rosen nodded, signaling Norman Osborn that he could leave. I'll go now. Mr. Stain, would you like to come with me? Norman nodded, preparing to leave tactfully, but he didn't forget his newly appointed executive director. Of course, Mr. Rosen, then I'll go and get acquainted with my new job. Obadiah naturally had no reason to refuse. After a brief word with Rosen, he followed Norman out. Rosen didn't stay long at Osborne Group either. After getting the technical documents he needed, he returned to Natasha's house. At this time, Natasha was cooking. Because Rosen had said that he would be taking her back to the main universe for a while, Natasha had cancelled her recent schedule and hadn't gone to work. After all, she was the boss, and what she said went. It's hard to imagine that the famous Black Widow can actually cook so well. Rosen was very surprised, looking at a table full of exquisite French dishes. After all, in the movies, Black Widow had never shown her culinary skills. As an agent, you can encounter any kind of situation, so cooking is also a course that needs to be learned. And French cuisine is the most influential cuisine in European and American high society, so it's a key focus for us to learn. Natasha explained, but in the future, I will try to learn some Chinese cuisine. Natasha had also asked Rosen what he wanted to eat before he left today. Unexpectedly, Rosen listed all Chinese dishes, which she had never even heard of, let alone cooked. After all, the Red Room's active regions had always been limited to Europe, America, and Africa, so it was naturally impossible for them to teach Chinese cuisine. Then I'm looking forward to it, because it's hard to find authentic Chinese food in the US. Please don't learn things like General Tso's chicken or fortune cookies. I will absolutely not acknowledge those as Chinese food. Rosen tasted a bite of red wine braised beef and thought it was quite good. I know, of course, but I'm curious, according to you, you grew up in the US, so why are you so familiar with real Chinese food? Natasha asked curiously. It's normal. It's true that I grew up in the US, but my grandpa and grandma weren't. They both could make very standard Chinese food, which those Americanized Chinese dishes can't compare to. Rosen replied. His original parents had largely assimilated into Western culture, but his original grandpa and grandma had maintained Eastern living habits until their deaths. He had also lived with them for a good part of his childhood. So now, even if Rosen displayed many Eastern living habits, it wouldn't seem out of place. I see. Natasha nodded, not continuing on this topic, but instead brought up the Red Room, as this trip back to deal with Drakov. That's right. SHIELD. Agents have left. It's time to deal with him and then take over the entire Red Room. Rosen nodded. Now, dealing with a Drakov was an easy matter for him. Then Melina and Yelena. Natasha said with some hesitation. She still had a little affection for these two former family members. Especially her younger sister Yelena. At this point in time, Yelena was still young and had not yet completed the final step of becoming a Black Widow. So, if there was a chance, Natasha still hoped that this sister could escape that fate. Yelena can be entrusted to you, and you can rest assured that I am not a madman like Drakov. For those children who haven't started Black Widow training, I will send them home. Those without homes will be arranged to be taken in by orphanages. But for those children who have already started training and know quite a bit, you should understand that sending them back is not a good thing. Rosen said. Once Black Widow training began, it basically meant they had seen blood. It would be very risky to simply throw such children into society. But even if they stay, they won't go through that final step, so you don't have to worry about that either. Rosen added. You know. Natasha was slightly surprised. As a mage, there are very few things in this world that I don't know, those are your own words. Rosen laughed. I have to say, having an omniscient boss like you sometimes feels terrifying, but at other times, it feels very reassuring. Natasha said with a smile, but she didn't mention Melina again. Because if Rosen didn't say anything, it meant he had other plans for Melina. And Natasha could pretty much guess with Drakov dead, the Red Room naturally needed a new leader. Rosen couldn't do everything himself. Where is this? The architectural style doesn't seem like Budapest. A few days later, Natasha followed Rosen out of the teleportation gate, looking at the architectural style outside the window. It wasn't Budapest, where she was the first time she left this universe. Of course it's not Budapest. Wherever I am, the teleportation gate is there. This is New York, Rosen replied casually. Is this your home? Hearing Rosen's words, Natasha nodded, then began subtly observing the furnishings inside the house. She quickly noticed that there were only traces of a woman living there, almost no traces of Rosen. So she deliberately asked a question. Haha, this is Jessica's home. Jessica is the Homelander who beat you until you couldn't get up earlier. Rosen, of course, knew the purpose of Natasha's question, but he didn't intend to hide it and just said it directly. What? That guy. You have people in SHIELD too. Hearing Rosen's answer, Natasha's eyes widened. After all, Rosen had never mentioned this before. Not entirely accurate. Jessica is my person, but she only has a cooperative relationship with SHIELD. However, SHIELD and Hydra will be mine sooner or later. Rosen said. What? Hydra? Didn't that disappear during World War II? Natasha didn't question Rosen's statement that SHIELD would be his sooner or later. At most, she maintained a reserved attitude in her heart. But when she heard the name Hydra, she was stunned for a moment. Disappeared. Then you're underestimating Hydra too much. After World War II, a large number of HYDRA's scientific researchers were absorbed by the Allies and the Soviet Union, and with Hydra's capabilities, the treatment given to them by the Allies and the Soviet Union was simply a hotbed for its resurgence. Rosen explained the reason for HYDRA's continued existence. And by now, SHIELD, except for a few high-ranking officials, has been almost completely infiltrated by Hydra. Calling it Snake SHIELD wouldn't be an exaggeration. Among the remaining mid to high-level personnel, about half are Skrulls, Rosen muttered to himself. But he didn't say it out loud. The information about Earth was enough for Natasha to digest for now. I understand now why you're so confident about taking over SHIELD. Natasha, in the past, was very wary of the enormous organization that was SHIELD. In fact, when she was cornered by Jessica and her team, if it weren't for Rosen suddenly appearing, she would have switched sides then and there. But now, her idealized view of SHIELD was completely shattered. If she had truly joined S.H.I.E.L.D. and fallen into Hydra's hands, she couldn't even imagine what she would have endured. After all, the world's history had been publicizing what kind of evil organization Hydra was for over half a century. Even Natasha, who had experienced the brutality of the Red Room, instinctively believed that it was an even more terrifying evil organization than the Red Room. So at this moment, she couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude towards Rosen for rescuing her from Snake Shield. And that's not all. To be precise, your Red Room, and even the Leviathan that the Red Room once belonged to, have actually been infiltrated by Hydra. Their efforts largely contributed to the collapse of the Soviet Union. It's just that the collapse of the Soviet Union was such a huge event, so big that even Hydra, a major instigator, didn't anticipate it, which allowed Dreykov to exploit a loophole and make the Red Room his private property. Rosen continued, looking at the somewhat startled Natasha with a playful expression. All right, stop talking, I'm exhausted. Natasha raised her hands in surrender. At this moment, she felt that this world was too dangerous, so much so that she was already starting to miss Little Spider's world. All right, no more talking. Come over quickly, we're leaving. Seeing this, Rosen didn't say anything more and began to cast mass teleportation. However, this was just a habitual remark. It didn't actually matter whether Natasha stood by him or not, as the radius of mass teleportation was a full 70 meters, and it wasn't limited to the 24 units in the game. Of course, because the spell came with a friend or foe identification function, there was no need to worry about accidentally taking away things that shouldn't be transported. Natasha knew this, as it wasn't the first time, but she still obediently walked over and stood beside Rosen. However, after the teleportation ended, Natasha was stunned again. Because the place where they reappeared was still not Budapest, but in front of the gate of a luxurious villa on a cliffside coast. And the address marked on the gate plaque was, "What are we doing in Los Angeles?" Natasha asked, puzzled. "This is Tony Stark's home," Rosen replied, then shouted at the camera on the gate, "Jarvis, tell Tony that the prophet has arrived." Natasha remained silent. Rosen, her new boss, could be said to be constantly giving her surprises. He not only knew a lot but also had a wide circle of friends far beyond her imagination. She was completely numb now. "Mr. Prophet, please come in. Mr. Stark is waiting for you in the laboratory." The two didn't wait long before Jarvis spoke, and the gate opened accordingly. And under Jarvis's guidance, the two smoothly arrived at Tony's laboratory. Mr. Prophet. Ethan was also in the laboratory and quickly greeted Rosen upon seeing him. "Mr. Prophet, come and see my masterpiece." Tony, who was busy, heard Rosen enter, proudly straightened up, and pointed to the silver marquee on a support frame. The time since Rosen left this world wasn't long, only about half a month in total. In such a short time, this guy had already built the marquee. Hey, this guy must have, just like in the plot, dumped all the company's affairs on Pepper. Rosen thought of Pepper, whom he hadn't officially met yet. Otherwise, she wouldn't be here. It looks pretty good. Have you officially flown it yet? Rosen looked at the marquee, nodded, and then asked. I haven't officially flown it yet. Today, you can witness a great birth. Tony said excitedly. While it's not ideal to pour cold water on your enthusiasm right now, I think it's necessary to remind you that you probably didn't consider the issue of high-altitude low-temperature icing during the design, Rosen said. Hearing Rosen's words, Tony froze for a moment, then couldn't help but curse. He just hadn't thought of it before. But with his intelligence, as soon as Rosen mentioned it, he knew where the problem was. While I should thank you for the reminder, honestly, your habit of pouring cold water at crucial moments is really annoying, Tony complained. Looks like the test flight will be delayed for a while. Ethan, take a break. Tony said to Ethan, then looked at Rosen again. And I think our Mr. Prophet certainly wouldn't come without a reason. Do you need me to make some coffee? Ethan asked. Cappuccino, please. Rosen nodded, not refusing. Just water. Natasha also said. Vegetable juice. Tony said. After Ethan finished counting, he went to work, and seeing his skilled manner, he clearly hadn't been idle during this time. Ah, I haven't even asked who this beautiful lady is yet. Tony asked after sizing up Natasha. Natasha Romanov, I am Mr. Rosen's assistant. Natasha introduced herself. Assistant, do you also know magic? Tony asked. Not yet, temporarily. Natasha replied, twitching her lips. Ah, tilde, I understand. Stark winked at Rosen. So you like this voluptuous type? Tony, I came to you this time because I need your help with something. Rosen said, ignoring Tony's teasing gaze. What a joke, as long as they're pretty, I like them all. Oh, I thought there was nothing in this world that could stump you, the all-knowing prophet. Hearing Rosen's words, Tony teased. First of all, I know many things in the world, but not everything. Even a god is not omniscient and omnipotent. Rosen emphasized. He wasn't wrong. Although there were many theoretically omniscient and omnipotent beings in the Marvel Universe, it was only theoretically so. After all, Marvel Comics editors are best at nesting dolls. You never know when a higher-level being might pop up. And Rosen couldn't be sure if the Marvel Universe he transmigrated to would have those high-dimensional beings. The way you're talking, it's as if there really are gods in this world. Tony twitched his lips. But very quickly, he felt something was off. Wait, since there's a prophet magician like Rosen in this world, why can't there be gods? And listening to Rosen's confident tone. It's not what I think, right? Tony looked at Rosen with a hint of hope. Rosen remained silent, just looking at him quietly. All right, I know. Tony covered his forehead. I should have thought of it sooner. Actually, there's no need to panic. Most of the so-called gods are just civilizations more advanced than Earth's civilization, not as terrifying as you imagine. Rosen said with a smile, seeing his expression. Most, so there are still real gods then. Tony said irritably. His good mood for the day was completely ruined by Rosen's arrival. Those true gods are high above, and under normal circumstances, they might not visit Earth even once in thousands or millions of years, so you don't need to be so fixated on it. Rosen said seriously, not continuing to pressure Tony. After all, this kid's psychological resilience is actually far weaker than others in the Avengers. And he's used to forcibly suppressing his thoughts, making him prone to depression. Rosen didn't want to drive this genius crazy, otherwise, who would work for him in the future? Thanks for your comfort, though it didn't help much. Just tell me what you need me for. Tony said irritably. Facing Tony's complaints, Rosen just smiled and didn't say much, only subtly gesturing to Natasha at his side. Natasha understood and took out her notebook. Then Rosen showed Tony the 4 technologies brought from Toby's Spider-Man world. Are you treating me like a tool? And this trash nuclear fusion technology, compared to my arc reactor, has no development value whatsoever. Tony complained and disparaged after seeing it. And its operation requires tritium, an extremely expensive metal. Is the person who developed this technology burning money? This glider is the same, it's incomparable to my Iron Man suit. This human enhancer and regenerative agent are somewhat interesting, but I need more time to research them. In Tony's words, apart from the 2 agents, the personal glider and nuclear fusion technology were directly devalued as worthless. Then why don't you give me a copy of your arc reactor and Iron Man suit technology? Facing Tony's disparagement, Rosen said unhurriedly. And hearing his words, Tony, who had been talking animatedly, suddenly seemed like a duck whose neck had been squeezed, unable to speak. Although Rosen saved him, and even helped him deal with the huge hidden danger of Obadiah, that was true. But the Iron Man suit and arc reactor technology were his lifelines. It was simply impossible for him to hand them over to Rosen, someone he had essentially only met twice. And setting aside the glider, the nuclear fusion technology isn't as bad as you say. In terms of energy output power, it's not much worse than your current arc reactor. Rosen said. As for the tritium you mentioned, that's even less of a problem. It's true that this stuff is scarce on Earth, but there's plenty in space. For example, the reserves on the moon are quite considerable. And if you calculate the cost of your own arc reactor, and then consider this, do you still think this technology is worthless? Rosen asked. Hearing Rosen's words, Tony couldn't help but fall into deep thought. You're right, if the cost of tritium drops significantly, the cost of this technology would indeed be much lower than the arc reactor. But the premise here is what you said, being able to mine tritium in the universe. So, do you have the technology for space mining? Tony agreed with Rosen's statement, looking at him intently as he asked. If Rosen really possessed this technology, he would have to exchange for it at any cost. Because tritium is something his arc reactor could actually use, and its effect would be far superior to the palladium he currently uses. It was just that the cost of tritium was too high before, which is why he chose palladium. Now that there was a better option, he certainly wouldn't mind switching. Not yet, but I know where to find this technology. It will take some time, but once I get it, I can share it with you. Rosen nodded, generously giving his promise. But before that, you'll have to help me perfect these few technologies. No problem, but that will also take quite a bit of time. Tony nodded. That's fine, I'm not in a hurry. I still have many things to do, so you can take your time. Rosen said. I'll leave this here with you. After handing over several technologies to Tony, Rosen left with Natasha. He could have tried and perfected the individual glider and nuclear fusion technology using engineering. But for Rosen, that would have been too time-consuming, too much effort, and quite risky. After all, it's goblin engineering, those who know, know. While Rosen's accidents when playing with engineering weren't frequent, they weren't non-existent either. And he still vividly remembered the warehouse explosion. In comparison, with Tony's abilities, the probability of such a situation was much lower. And even if something did go wrong, well, that would be his bad luck. Rosen thought irresponsibly. Otherwise, would he really be considered a great benevolent person? Always helping Iron Man. That always came with a price. As long as Rosen maintained a state of bestowing favor upon Tony, the other party would never escape the fate of working for him. This was also determined by Tony's personality. He disliked owing favors the most, and once he owed one, he would try every means to repay it. But if he couldn't repay it, Phew, this time it's finally Budapest. Natasha looked at the safe house she appeared in and finally breathed a sigh of relief. This time, Rosen had teleported her to the same safe house she had been in before heading to Toby Little Spider's universe. She had been through too much recently, and even she was starting to feel overwhelmed. It's up to you now. Take me to Melina. I'm sure you won't tell me she's raising pigs in St. Petersburg. Rosen said to Natasha, making a joke that only he would understand at that time. Of course, I think she should be at the training camp now. Natasha nodded, though she was a bit confused as to why Rosen would associate Melina, St. Petersburg, and raising pigs together. In fact, Natasha had hoped to directly target Dreykov. After all, in her opinion, Dreykov was the core of the entire Red Room. Once he was dealt with, the Red Room would naturally crumble. Of course, Natasha's personal hatred for Dreykov was also a factor. But clearly, Rosen did not agree with her idea. Because the movie plot had long proven that although Natasha was the most outstanding Black Widow of her generation, her understanding of Dreykov, her first superior, was quite limited. Although she knew Dreykov had many body doubles, she subconsciously believed that Dreykov wouldn't deceive his own daughter. She thought that by finding Dreykov's daughter, she could discover his location. And she used Dreykov's daughter to carry out an assassination. But facts proved that Dreykov had very little humanity. Even his biological daughter was merely a tool in his eyes. Not only was his daughter usually cared for by a body double, successfully evading Natasha's assassination, but even when his daughter was caught in an explosion and on the verge of death, he ruthlessly turned her into a emotionless killing machine, also known as Taskmaster. So, given his cunning, finding his true self would likely take Rosen a considerable amount of time, even with his abilities. Since that was the case, it would be better to find someone who understood Dreykov even better to expose this old fox. And that person was, without a doubt, the previous generation's Black Widow, Melina Vostokov, who had worked with Dreykov for over 20 years. Moreover, Rosen's objective was different from Natasha's from the very beginning. Natasha simply wanted to kill Dreykov and escape his control. But what Rosen wanted from the start was to control the Red Room, and killing Dreykov was just one step in that process. As Rosen's subordinate, Natasha naturally couldn't go against his wishes now. So she could only obediently take Rosen to the Red Room training camp. But, where is everyone? Natasha was stunned, looking at the empty castle. The Red Room training camp Natasha was familiar with was located in an ancient castle in a remote mountainous area of Hungary. After completing the mission in Ohio, She was sent here 1995. She was 11 years old that year. For the next 13 years, she lived, trained, undertook her first mission, and officially became a Black Widow, all within this gloomy and oppressive castle. Therefore, she was extremely familiar with every corner and every hidden sentry of this castle. She had simulated hundreds of escape plans in her mind. But now, this training camp was empty. How long had she been gone? Including the time of her last mission, it had only been a few months, right? Dreykov, that old fox, is truly cautious. But perhaps it's this very caution that has allowed him to evade S.H.I.E.L.D., Hydra, and the eyes and ears of various countries, constantly expanding the Red Room. Rosen couldn't help but exclaim in admiration. To develop and expand the Red Room without being discovered, amidst the cracks between S.H.I.E.L.D., Hydra, the 5 major moving vendors, and even the Avengers, Dreykov was more than just capable. If it weren't for his deep control over the Red Room and his overly sinister nature, Rosen would have considered bringing him under his command. I'm sorry, Rosen, I should have thought of it sooner. Natasha gritted her teeth, saying unwillingly. It has nothing to do with you, I was negligent. I estimate that Dreykov abandoned this place after you were taken away by me and lost contact that day. Rosen didn't blame Natasha for this, he had underestimated Dreykov's caution. Give me some time, I will definitely find that old fool. Natasha requested Rosen's permission, she was unwilling to give up on dealing with Dreykov like this. As long as that old fool was alive, she couldn't sleep soundly, even in another universe. It wasn't fear, but hatred. Just thinking of him living a carefree life, she could feel a dull ache in her abdomen. Only his blood could completely eradicate all of this, and perhaps not even then. No need to rush. Perhaps, as I said before, we can go to St. Petersburg. Facing Natasha's eagerness, Rosen said unhurriedly, we can also make a detour to Moscow and bring a small gift for our hardworking Mr. Tony Stark. Hearing Rosen's words, Natasha was dumbfounded. Make a detour to Moscow. Although both were major cities in Russia. St. Petersburg was to the northwest of Hungary, while Moscow was to the west, with a distance of over 600 kilometers between the two places. How could they possibly be on the same route? Rosen's mention of going to Moscow to bring Tony a small gift naturally referred to the Vanko father and son. More precisely, it referred to the blueprint of the first-generation arc reactor in their hands. As for the Vanko father and son themselves, Rosen decided to send them to Toby's Spider-Man world. However, given the instability of the Vanko father and son, Rosen would only let them do some marginal auxiliary work. He would definitely not let them participate in all research and production processes like Justin Hammer. Moreover, with professionals like Dr. Octopus watching, the probability of problems occurring was low, even though Dr. Octopus's main research direction had always been nuclear fusion technology. But from the situation of the auxiliary mechanical tentacles that made him, Dr. Octopus, it could be seen that his accomplishments in artificial intelligence technology were equally impressive. As for the incident in Spider-Man No Way Home where the mechanical tentacles were counter-controlled by Little Spider's nanotechnology, it couldn't be considered a blemish on Dr. Octopus. After all, that was Tony Stark's technology. And Tony Stark is one of the genius ceiling in the Marvel Universe. Only a very few beings, such as Mr. Fantastic, can compare to him. It's not shameful for Dr. Octopus to lose to him. It's like when an ordinary scientist is compared to Einstein, he has already won. What's more, there was a huge difference in era and technology between the universe where Dr. Octopus resided and the universe where Stark resided. So, asking Dr. Octopus to compete with Tony would be too difficult for him. However, letting him guard against the Vanko father and son, who were also far inferior to Tony, was completely sufficient in Rosen's opinion. And letting Dr. Octopus keep an eye on the Vanko father and son was actually only a secondary option. Rosen's primary choice was to control Anton Vanko using the talisman skill. Unlike Ivan Vanko, the main villain of Iron Man 2. Although Anton Vanko was once an important assistant to Howard and participated in the development of the first-generation arc reactor. However, in the plot, he was basically like General Sokoviev, who was successfully controlled by Rosen in the Spider-Man world. Although he played a certain role in advancing the plot, he was a character who died early in the story. The possibility of him being controlled was very high. To Moscow, Rosen and Natasha didn't use group teleportation but took a plane. There was no other way, although teleportation was convenient, it required a friendly unit as a marker. And although Rosen had placed some mechanical small animals in some cities in several Western European countries while passing through during his previous trip to Hungary with Jessica and Hawkeye. But he had never actually been to Russia. So, teleportation couldn't be used, and they could only take a plane. However, the current Rosen no longer needed to sneak in as before. After a slight disguise, he used the talisman skill to control a few customs officials. Under their cover, the two boarded a plane and arrived in Moscow without any hindrance. Well, okay, no identity information, no entry records, it was still sneaking in. Natasha was also amazed by Rosen's ability to control people's minds. Also relying on the talisman skill, Rosen easily obtained the address and information of the Vanko father and son from local officials in Moscow. Arriving at the apartment building where the Vanko father and son lived, at Rosen's signal, Natasha knocked on the dilapidated door. However, Natasha knocked for a long time, but no one opened the door. Seeing this, Natasha was not polite. With Rosen's permission, she kicked the dilapidated wooden door directly, retiring it. As the door was broken open, a strong smell of alcohol followed. At the same time, there were bursts of coughing. The two walked in to take a look. Well, Ivan Vanko, the son, was passed out drunk. Only the paralyzed old father, Anton Vanko, was left, coughing and looking at the suddenly intruding Rosen and Natasha with surprise and uncertainty. Anton Vanko. Rosen ignored the unconscious Ivan and asked Anton. Yes, I am. Who are you? An Easterner? A Japanese? Or a South Korean? Anton asked, looking at Rosen's Asian face. But before Rosen could answer, the old man started muttering to himself. Hee, have you finally realized my value? It's just too late, I know I don't have much time left to live. Apparently, Anton had mistaken Rosen for an intelligence agent from one of the countries he mentioned. When the Soviet Union collapsed back then, these countries had invited many scientists from the Soviet Union. However, at that time, he was just an exiled criminal. Even his own country had forgotten him. These countries naturally couldn't have known about him. And now, he probably got the information from somewhere, knew about him, and wanted to invite him. Hearing Anton's words, Rosen couldn't help but twitch the corner of his mouth. This old man had a lot of internal drama. It's just a pity that he thought too much, he was just a completely forgotten person. The lost glory could no longer be regained. Rosen was too lazy to say more to him and simply reached out to cast a spell on the old man. The moment he saw the other party, the skill had already judged that the other party was a usable white. And Ivan, who was beside him, was clearly red, unable to be controlled. As a violet magical light flashed, Anton's gaze first became confused, then indifferent, and finally turned into fanaticism as he looked towards Rosen. Cough, cough, cough. Anton Vanko. Greetings, master. The old man struggled to get up and kneel before Rosen. But his body was already on the verge of exhaustion, and he couldn't stand up at all. Don't move, drink this. Seeing this, Rosen was happy that the talisman was successfully used, but also speechless as he threw a bottle of healing potion over. He was really worried that the old man would die if he delayed any longer. Anton, completely under control, naturally didn't hesitate. He drank the potion in one gulp and immediately felt incredibly light. When he tried to get up again, he actually stood up successfully. However, the moment he stood up, a strong foul odor also accompanied him, causing Rosen and Natasha beside him to instinctively take a step back. Apparently, although Ivan seemed filial in the plot, he didn't do a good job of taking care of people. Especially for someone like Anton, who was basically bedridden. Sorry, master, I haven't bathed in too long. Anton explained with some embarrassment upon seeing this. It's all right, just clean up later. Also, don't call me master anymore, just call me boss. It wouldn't be good if your son heard. Rosen waved his hand, we're going out first. When you're cleaned up, bring your son to see me here. With that, he eagerly took Natasha and left the foul-smelling room. And seeing Rosen leave, Anton, who felt guilty for being so disrespectful to his master for the first time, cast an angry gaze at Ivan, who knew nothing yet. What's going on with your son? Rosen's expression was a little strange when he saw the Venko father and son again. Anton was fine, revitalized by the potion, he had cleaned himself up and looked like a spirited old man. His son, Ivan, was different, although he had clearly tidied himself up, his face was bruised and swollen, evidently having been severely beaten. However, he no longer had the decadent look from when he was drunk, his gaze towards Rosen was full of curiosity and gratitude. Oh, it's nothing, just a young man being reckless. He was a bit too excited when he learned my illness was cured, so he fell. Anton Venko casually explained. Right, I'm a 40-something-year-old man, young and reckless. Ivan Venko could only complain helplessly in his heart. But there was nothing he could do, who else but his father would say such a thing? Although Anton Venko's life could be described as a failure, he was still very good to his son, Ivan Venko, who was also very filial. Why did he seek revenge on Tony Stark in the original plot? Was it for himself? No, he just wanted to uphold his father's dignity and prove that his father was no worse than Howard. Otherwise, there would have been no need to wait until his old father passed away to seek revenge on Tony. So, if Anton Venko had died of illness, he would have inevitably followed the same path as in the original plot. But now it was different, Rosen had cured his father. Thank you for saving the old man, Mr. Rosen. Ivan Venko said to Rosen with a serious expression. I don't need thanks, after all, I think you should be clear that there's no such thing as a free lunch in this world. Rosen said to Ivan bluntly, wanting to see how he would respond. Of course, as long as you can keep the old man healthy and alive, my life is yours. Ethan promised readily. He, of course, knew there was no gratuitous kindness in this world, but he simply didn't care. I hope you keep your word. Rosen looked at him and nodded. Then, taking a day, Rosen sent the Venko father and son to Toby's Spider-Man world, entrusting them to Norman Osborn, who arranged for them to join Dr. Octopus's laboratory as Rosen had previously envisioned. With these two joining, the arc reactor and nuclear fusion technology could be simultaneously implemented in Toby's Spider-Man world. After completing all this, Rosen then took Natasha and continued to St. Petersburg. Upon arriving in St. Petersburg, Rosen summoned Warhawk, Dire Bear, Wild Boar, Carrion Beetle, and even some Triant's forest guardian skill, force of nature, sending them out to search for the farm that matched Rosen's memory. Mechanical critters were out of the question, there were quite a lot of wild beasts in the European wilderness. Mechanical critters with no combat power could easily be damaged if these beasts mistook them for prey. However, it must be said that Warhawk, the Air Force, with super long-range vision, was the most convenient for finding things. In just 2 days, Rosen pinpointed the target location. Melina, who had left the Red Room training camp, had indeed come here to raise pigs. And when they discovered Melina's farm, they also found an unexpected bonus. That was Red Guardian, Alexei Shostakov. At this time, Alexei had not yet been thrown into prison by Drakov, nor had he given up on himself and gained weight. Instead, he was a rather muscular Russian man. When Warhawk discovered them, the two were arguing about something in the farm's yard. I've found them. In the hotel, Rosen said to Natasha, who was beside him. Them. Natasha, who was already ready to go, was puzzled. Your adoptive father from your time in the US is also there. How about it? Want to stage a scandalous drama of a daughter beating up her parents? Rosen asked teasingly. Oh, of course, I've been looking forward to this day for a long time. Facing Rosen's teasing, Natasha was not displeased, instead, she was quite excited. Why? Although they were disguised as a family back then, under the care of Melina and Alexei, young Natasha and Yelena were filled with admiration for the two. After all, for 3 whole years, even raising a pet would lead to feelings. Let alone people. The sisters had truly imagined countless times how wonderful it would be if they were a real family. But what was the result? After completing the mission, Natasha and Yelena were personally handed over to Drakov by Alexei and Melina and sent into the hell of the Red Room. Especially Melina, who, as an instructor, personally trained Natasha to become a Black Widow. If Natasha harbored no hatred for this adoptive parent pair, then she would simply be a born saint. In the Black Widow movie plot, Natasha, reunited with her adoptive parents, didn't go too far because after becoming an Avenger, she had already experienced too much, especially the impact of the Civil War. It made her let go of a lot of hatred. But the young Natasha now was not so particular. Rosen giving her the chance to take revenge on these adoptive parents, she was quite enthusiastic. Moreover, now, with Rosen's help, she completely had the ability to do so. It seems you're already a bit impatient, then let's go. Rosen smiled slightly at this, activating the teleportation. They reappeared on a hillside, with Warhawk landed nearby, serving as a coordinate. After Rosen and Natasha appeared, Warhawk soared into the sky again, acting as a visual guide for Rosen. Melina's farm was just a kilometer away, down the hillside. However, Rosen did not rush over but began to cast skills. Goblin Tinkerer Ultimate Skill, Mechanical Goblin. In the game, the effect of this skill was to transform the Goblin Tinkerer, who originally controlled two mechanical arms, into controlling a war machine similar to a tank. But in the real world, like the Goblin Tinkerer's other two skills, Mechanical Goblin also had a conventional form and a true form. The conventional form was like the Goblin Tinkerer in the game, controlling a war machine. However, it wasn't a tank, but a mecha with a strong goblin style, loaded with various weapons. Its appearance was very similar to the Garrosh's Worldbreaker mecha from the Warcraft spin-off, World of Warcraft, except it lacked Garrosh's mecha's huge shield. As for the true form, it was for Rosen to designate a real-world war machine as the summoning target, which could be a tank, fighter jet, or mecha, any kind. As long as Rosen had it. And after becoming the summoning target, this war machine would naturally be incorporated into the summoning space that came with this skill, without wasting Rosen's own system space. Of course, Rosen certainly wouldn't choose things like tanks or fighter jets as summoning targets. So, after activating this skill, he used the Vibranium energy core he had previously created to build a mecha with an appearance quite similar to Ironmonger. More importantly, the war weapon summoned by the true form skill was a physical entity, so it could be used by others. And this mecha, plus the series of magic equipment Rosen had given her before, was Natasha's confidence to take on her adoptive parents alone. Melina, are you really unwilling to tell me where Drakov is? Alexei angrily questioned Melina. Although they had acted as Natasha and Yelena's adoptive parents, Alexei and Melina were never a real couple. Of course, Alexei wanted to be, after all, Melina, as the previous generation's Black Widow, had undeniable charm. At her peak, Melina was in no way inferior to Natasha. However, Melina simply looked down on this brute who had been constantly misled by Drakov, believing himself to be Drakov's comrade in arms. For example, just like now, after Natasha, the current Black Widow, went missing, Drakov felt a crisis and went into hiding. The entire Red Room had also hidden itself. Alexei was simply abandoned. He couldn't contact Drakov at all, which is why he came here, hoping to get news of his comrade in arms, through Melina. But how could Melina, who had already received Drakov's instructions, possibly tell him? I really don't know where he is. I've been transferred to the research department and haven't seen him in a long time. Melina feigned helplessness. But in reality, she had already notified Drakov. If there were no surprises, Drakov's people were on their way. To Drakov, Alexei was now worthless, and Drakov had grown tired of this idiot he had exploited. Moreover, Alexei's continued activity had become a risk for Drakov. So Drakov planned to use this opportunity to lock him up. Kill him. That would be too wasteful. As a successful super soldier, Alexei's blood still had some value. I'm almost unable to recognize you, Melina. We worked together for 3 years, and I thought we had a friendship. Alexei, unaware of everything, still tried to move Melina. Oh, of course, Alexei, but I've said it, I really don't know. Wait, what's that? Get out of the way. Melina, who was originally planning to continue to mislead Alexei, discovered a black dot in the distant sky, constantly enlarging and falling towards their location. Seeing this, she quickly pushed Alexei away and dodged to the side. With a loud bang, a massive figure crashed down exactly where Melina and Alexei had been standing, kicking up a large cloud of dust. Oh, this feels so good. A slightly husky female voice shouted excitedly. Natasha. Hearing this familiar voice, Melina, who had just gotten up and pulled out her weapon, widened her eyes. What? Natasha. On the other side, Alexei, hearing Melina's words, also stumbled over to Melina's side and looked at the huge figure in the smoke. As the smoke cleared, what appeared before them was a large humanoid machine over 3 meters tall. Long time no see, dear mom and dad. I've really missed you these past few years. As the humanoid machine's head mask opened, revealing Natasha's delicate face, she gritted her teeth as she looked at the two. Oh ho ho, haven't seen you in a few years, Natasha, you've grown so big. And what is this machine? A new weapon from the Red Room. At this moment, Alexei clearly hadn't realized that the daughter in front of him wasn't simply here to catch up. Hearing Alexei's words, Melina inwardly cursed him as an idiot. Couldn't he tell from Natasha's sudden descent just now that she was here to cause trouble? However, she didn't show it, instead looking at Natasha and asking with a concerned expression, Natasha, I heard you went missing earlier, and I was worried for a while. It's so good to see you back safe. Is that so? Perfect. I'm here this time to have a good reunion with you, mom and dad. Natasha revealed a charming smile. But the next second, the mask closed, and several cannon barrels extended from the mech's shoulders, aimed at Melina and Alexei. Melina's expression changed at the sight, and she frantically fled to the side. Similarly, facing the muzzles, even if Alexei was pure, he knew Natasha wasn't there for a family reunion, and he also tacitly fled in the opposite direction. The next second, 8 rockets fired at the two of them. Although Rosen had instructed her beforehand to keep them alive, it was true. But she hadn't been learning to pilot the mech for long, so a little mistake was normal, right? Besides, given Melina and Alexei's abilities, Natasha didn't think they would be killed so easily by an explosion. And indeed, just as Natasha expected, although both were somewhat disheveled, they successfully dodged this wave of attacks. After successfully dodging the attack, Melina ran wildly into the house. Seeing this, Natasha, piloting the mech, was about to give chase. But at this moment, Alexei rushed forward, trying to block her. Natasha didn't indulge him. Her mechanical arm delivered a backhand punch, directly sending Alexei flying and describing a perfect arc in midair. Alexei was a super soldier, but he was still flesh and blood. How could he compare in strength to a large machine? Moreover, what Natasha was piloting wasn't a lightweight mech like Tony's Iron Man suit. That single punch directly knocked Alexei unconscious for a while. Seeing that Alexei was no longer moving, Natasha didn't continue her attack but walked into the house, preparing to find Melina. Meanwhile, Melina had already rushed into the house's armory, put on her weapons, and even picked up a shield, clearly prepared for Alexei. Although their contact time was short, as a super agent and also a scientist, Melina had already seen at a glance that the mech Natasha was piloting was extraordinary. It would be very difficult for her to defeat this adoptive daughter on her own. Only by joining forces with Alexei would there be a glimmer of hope. Just as Melina finished arming herself, Natasha piloted the mech directly, breaking through the house's front door. There was no other way, the mech's size was much taller than the door. She couldn't get in without breaking the door. But after entering, Natasha froze. Because the interior layout of this house was exactly the same as the home they had for 3 years while undercover in Ohio. Clearly, although Melina had sent Natasha and Yelena into the Red Room, deep down, she still missed the life they had during those 3 years. Like other Black Widows, Melina could not have children. So, during those 3 years, she did indeed bestow her limited maternal love upon Natasha and Yelena. It was just that because of her early experiences, she didn't have the courage to defy Drakov. She could only numb herself in this way. While Natasha was in a daze, a red electric light shot out from the darkness, hitting her mech. Immediately, the mech's arms dropped limply. Natasha, as a Black Widow, your emotions are still too rich. Melina stepped out of the darkness and said, looking at the seemingly paralyzed mech. What she had used just now was an electrical attack specifically targeting electronic devices, and from the current situation, it seemed to have succeeded. Natasha, come out. I don't know what you've encountered, but I'll intercede for you. Seeing that the mech Natasha was piloting seemed to have lost power, Melina breathed a slight sigh of relief and persuaded her. However, while speaking, she did not relax her guard. Nor did she approach the mech rashly. Intercede for me. You wouldn't think you've already won, would you, dear mother? Natasha chuckled and retorted, I'll return that line to you. As long as you give up resisting, I can consider letting you go. As soon as she finished speaking, several flames jetted out from the back of the mech, which had seemingly lost power. The entire mech then rapidly crashed towards Melina, sweeping everything in its path. As for the previous attack by Melina's Widow's Bite current weapon, which seemed to cause it to lose power, it was merely an illusion Natasha had deliberately created. This mech was built by Rosen after he activated level 3 engineering and goblin engineering skills. It can be said to be a crystallization of engineering, modern technology, and magic. Although from the outside it looked far less refined than Tony's Iron Man suit, in terms of combat power and defense, it was definitely superior to Tony's early suits. The mere high-voltage current from the Widow's Bite, apart from replenishing a little energy for the mech, could not cause any damage at all. Even if Thor came, the result would basically be the same as in the Avengers plot, charging the mech. Moreover, because the energy core was made of vibranium, the amount of electricity it could withstand might not be inferior to the Mark VI suit, which used new elements in the Avengers. It's just a pity that Melina, the previous Black Widow, was too cautious, and Natasha's disguise failed to lure her closer. Since that was the case, Natasha simply continued with force. Seeing the mech charging towards her, Melina, who had been on alert, quickly dodged to the side, hoping to avoid the impact. However, what she didn't expect was that this seemingly cumbersome mech, just as it was about to pass Melina, suddenly made an astonishingly agile sharp turn, continuing to ram into Melina. Melina's eyes nearly popped out at the sight. At this moment, she was still in midair, with no way to avoid it. Fortunately, when she grabbed her equipment earlier, she also brought Alexei's Red Guardian shield. So she hurriedly held the shield in front of her. With a loud bang, after Melina was sent flying, she first crashed through the wall of the house wooden, and then flew dozens of meters away before landing. After landing, Melina felt that at least a dozen of her bones were broken. If she wasn't rescued in time, she would likely die. It was also fortunate that the Red Guardian shield was sturdy enough. Although not comparable to Captain America's vibranium shield, it was specially made and wouldn't break easily. This house was also a wooden structure, not reinforced concrete. Otherwise, she might have been scattered into pieces on the spot. But looking at Natasha slowly walking towards her, Melina understood that this battle was over. Melina didn't understand what had happened during Natasha's disappearance, or where she had gotten such a mech, which clearly did not belong to the technology of this era. If Iron Man had already been born, Melina might have been able to link Natasha with Tony Stark. But now, Tony had only just completed the Mark E, and the Mark III that would make him Iron Man hadn't even started production yet. Just as Melina was in despair, a figure ran over from a distance, picked up the shield that had fallen beside her, and stood in front of her. It was Alexei, who had been sent flying by Natasha earlier. One could only say he was worthy of a super soldier's physique. Being sent flying by a mech, he woke up so quickly. Go, Alexei, you can't stop her. Melina said with a bitter smile at the sight. She hadn't expected Alexei to still stand up at a time like this. But what was the use? Red Guardian. In front of this mech, he was a joke. However, Alexei ignored Melina's persuasion and instead charged towards Natasha with his shield raised. Seeing this scene, whether it was Melina, Natasha, or Rosen watching from the shadows, they were all a bit speechless. Compared to Captain America, this guy was indeed a bit simple-minded. Seeing this, Natasha was not polite. With a bang, she punched the shield. Before Alexei could react, another punch. 3 punches, 4 punches. Aside from holding up his shield and enduring, Alexei was like Captain America being relentlessly attacked by Thanos in Avengers 4, completely unable to react. Finally, the shield in Alexei's hand could no longer withstand such fierce attacks and began to crack. Although this shield was specially made, it was ultimately not a powerful material like vibranium. The metal Rosen used to build the mech was also not, although using the original method of creating the orichalcum energy core, which was enchanting metal, did not allow Rosen to create a qualified magic energy core. However, the method of enchanting could also be used to strengthen metal. In other words, enchanting is actually a very crude form of enchantment. And the metal Rosen used to build the mech was all superalloy that had been enchanted and strengthened. It was only stronger, not weaker, than the shield in Alexei's hand. Soon, Alexei stared blankly at the small piece of shield in his hand. But while he was stunned, Natasha would not be. With just a gentle slap, she sent him flying. Then, piloting the mech, she came to Melina's side, extended a cannon barrel from her right arm, and aimed it at her. Seeing this, Melina resignedly closed her eyes. But after waiting for a long time, death did not come. Ah, that feels good, boss, it's your turn to make an appearance. Natasha opened the cockpit, looked at the disheveled Melina, and said languidly. After all, she was someone Rosen wanted, so she couldn't actually kill her. And after beating the two of them up, much of the pent-up frustration accumulated over the years dissipated. Those 3 years of living together still left her with a bit of nostalgia and affection for them. Now that she had vented her anger, it was pretty much over. Hearing Natasha's words, Melina couldn't help but be startled. Boss. She subconsciously opened her eyes, only to find a young man in a long robe, magic robe, had appeared beside Natasha, she didn't know when. Facing Melina's questioning gaze, Rosen simply cast a holy light spell with a flick of his hand. The next moment, Melina felt as if she was bathing in a hot spring, and her whole body was so comfortable she almost cried out. As the warmth subsided, Melina was horrified to discover that her previously almost fatal injuries had actually healed. Consider yourself lucky to be useful, boss spared your life. Honestly tell us, where is Drakov? Natasha said to Melina with annoyance. Natasha defected to you. And that armor, did you give it to her? Melina ignored the unfilial daughter's words and instead asked Rosen. That's right, I'm planning to take out Drakov and take over the Red Room. I don't know if you choose to cooperate or prepare to be buried with him. Rosen nodded and spoke directly. If possible, I hope you let me stab Drakov too when you kill him. Melina was silent for 2 seconds before choosing to surrender. She indeed had a psychological shadow regarding Drakov, but her mind wasn't broken. From that mech, and the ability that completely healed her with just a flash of light, it was clear that the person in front of her was even more formidable. Thanks for watching.